Welcome, everybody. I'm Andrew Beatty, your host for today's show, and welcome to Perspectives Live from right from Ottawa. A little bit of a different background today. With the Ontario lockdown in effect, we're all doing this virtually from home. So we have people from not only across the country, but right around the world joining us on this show today. So welcome. Our topic today is skilling for the future. And it couldn't be more aptly timed to be discussing this topic today. And I'm going to be joined in a few moments by my co-host, Mary Butler. Many of you know Mary, of course. She's the president of New Brunswick Community College, and she's also a member of the CICAN Board of Directors. So I'm going to be excited to bring on Mary. Mary's going to bring in some guests in a little bit. And her guests today, I'm going to read these names because I want to make sure I get them and get everything correct. It's Shingai Manjengwa, who is the founder and CEO of Fireside Analytics. We're also going to have Stephen Tobin, who's going to be joining us in a little bit. Stephen Tobin is the executive director of the Labor Market Information Council. And then we're very, very pleased as well to have João Santos, who's the senior expert, I want to get this right, senior expert in the Directorate General for Employment, Social Affairs, and Inclusion with the European Commission, joining us directly from Europe. So we're very excited to have a great show and a great discussion today. But first, before I get too far down the road, I just want to talk a little bit about the show format and how you can participate. If you're joining us right now by chance on Facebook Live, I would encourage you to pull out a second screen or another device and actually go to slido.com, okay? Slido.com. And here you're going to be able to watch the show, but it's also participate in the show. And that's a big part because we want to hear your perspectives on these issues as well. On Slido.com, what's going to happen here is that you're going to enter a hashtag, and I'm going to give it to you now. It's Perspectives Live. So enter hashtag Perspectives Live. When you get into the show, you're going to be able to you're going to be able to ask our panelists questions, and we're going to have a Q&A a little later on in the show. And then you're also going to be able to add your comments and your suggestions and your own ideas under the ideas section, and we encourage you to use that as well. But so to get us all started, I thought we'd start by actually starting a poll. Let me just launch the poll here and open it up. And I'm going to encourage you to go and vote on this poll. So I put it up on the screen. You can see it here. And it says, with the skills landscape shifting across many sectors, what should the main focus for the future of skills development? Should it be stronger connections between industry post-secondary institutions, an increased role in AI, a focus on priority learning assessments? Anyway, you see them right there. So you can then go ahead and place your vote, and then we will then go back to and take a look at some of those answers in a little bit. But while that is going on, I would be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to welcome my first guest, which is none other than the president and CEO, Denise Amiot of CICAN. Denise, are you there? I'm doing great. There you are. Now I can see you. I'm doing great. Denise, I just wanted to ask you, this is such a timely topic that we're having a discussion on the future skills. What are your thoughts on future skills?
Okay. How much time do we have, Andrew?
Well, I'm going to ask you to keep it brief, okay? I'm going to ask you to keep it brief.
Yes, absolutely. So, Andrew, there's a lot of change happening. And when you have the context of the current global pandemic, there's even more change. Like we have changed the way we work, we have changed the way we play, and the way we visit each other. And when we talk about skilling for the future, we must be forward thinking. Like we must be open to do things differently, especially with respect to skills development. So it's true that the changes and disruptions pose a challenge. That said, I firmly believe that it also offers new opportunities to train the workforce of the future and ensure that Canadians have, in fact, the skills they need to succeed for years to come, and that no one is left behind. That is why at Colleges and Institutes Canada, we are so pleased when the federal government announced in 2019 the creation of the new Future Skills Council and the Future Skills Center. As some of you know, the council is comprised of 15 senior representatives from across the private, public, labor, and not-for-profit sector, which represents a very good cross-sectoral collaboration network for developing a shared vision on the future of skills, the future of work, and the future of learning in Canada. And of course, I was very pleased and proud to have been invited to be part of the council representing the post-secondary sector.
Well, Denise, the council published an important report. Can you briefly just share with me what the vision of that was and some of its key findings? I'm going to ask you to be brief, though.
Absolutely, I'll be very brief. So the vision of the council, it's really that Canada must become a learning nation where people build, where people improve, and where people add to their skills throughout their lives. So not only learning during a certain period of their life, but throughout. And the report also insists on breaking down barriers. The report at the end of the day, it's a call for action. And I will share 5 key priorities. I will not mention them, but they will appear on the slide. So you will be able to read them. So it goes from making informed choices because you have good labor market information, and ensuring equality of opportunity, of course, for all. And this includes, skills development to support Indigenous self-determination, have innovative approaches to skill development, as well as develop skills for sustainable futures, which is extremely, extremely important. And, Andrew, we all have a role to play in ensuring that we have a skilled workforce to meet the challenges of today, but also the challenges of tomorrow. And so I want to say to the audience, I know that a number of you are doing initiatives addressing some of the 5 recommendations that there is in the report. So let us know, because we want to start compiling those best practices and share it with all our members. Because at CICAN, we are committed to work closely with our member institutions, our partner organizations, and stakeholders, and we want to make a difference, and we'll be able to do it together. So I'm very excited to have our speakers today where we'll be able to go deep dive, I think you say in English.
Yeah, no, you said it right, and I noticed a comment just came up on screen right away about getting that report the council's report, and I will make sure that after the show that we will put links up, so make sure that people can access that information for everybody. So thank you for those who are asking, and let me just add to that, if I may, Denise, real quickly before you leave. A good point to start to getting those thoughts in is to actually use Slido right now. So if you're not on Slido, go on to Slido under Perspectives Live, and then put in your ideas and your comments right there, and then we can do that. Denise, thank you so much, and thanks for setting the stage on this. And I'm going to now welcome my next guest onto the show, none other than Mary Butler. Mary, are you there?
Yes, sir, I am. Hi, Andrew.
Hi there. We're just going to get you to come up on screen. I see Denise is still there, but I don't know what. Maybe my screen is frozen, but I'm sure these things just happen. Mary, I know everybody can hear us, so I just wanted to ask you. Let me just take a step back before I get into the question for you directly right now. Because if anybody who's interested in looking for that report that Denise was just referencing, it's now up on Slido right now. The link is right there. our team at CICAN is working hard, so everybody should be able to get to that right away if you want to access that report. Mary, I know I wanted to ask you a point, because how do you see the pivotal role of colleges and institutions playing, as we're talking about future skills, especially as it relates to not only on a national level, but an international level?
Yeah. Well, Andrew, I think that's interesting because more often than not, I think people know colleges at a personal level, either based on their own experience, that is someone they know, or stories they've heard. But few understand in a real way the historical and ongoing role that colleges play in economic and community development through education. When communities and economies are disrupted, whether it's the closure of a mine or a plant, a major employer pulling out of a specific sector or space, or other disruptive force that leaves hundreds of people in an area unemployed, it's colleges that respond with upskilling and reskilling programs to get those displaced workers back into the labor market and gainfully employed in a relatively short period. And the small towns, regions, and provinces that have experienced this type of labor market disruption recognize and appreciate in a real, tangible way the role that colleges play in that type of recovery of those communities and economies that might otherwise have floundered or retracted in the wake of such sharp and widespread unemployment. But it's also important to note that those same disruptive forces impact individuals. And we've seen that, especially through COVID. We're going to see it again with climate change initiatives and the greening of the economy, or even the fourth industrial revolution, right? That threatens the sustainability of certain jobs that have been around for a very long time. So the advances that colleges are making in the areas of micro-credentials, prior learning recognition, are helping to develop non-traditional pathways to a post-secondary education for underrepresented groups. And this, as Denise pointed out, will more evenly distribute the corresponding economic, social, and health benefits that brings. And so colleges are poised to prepare the workforce of today and tomorrow, which is needed, given that the majority of jobs that are going to be in demand and required for not only economic recovery, but resilience, require some form of post-secondary education, and more often than not, college programming. So by reaching further into the labor market to take in those who have traditionally been underrepresented in post-secondary education, and by increasing prior learning and offering more flexible options like micro-credentials, we remove some of those barriers that have traditionally held people back. So I think we're poised and ready, and actually have one of the most critical roles to play.
Well, I'd be remiss, Mary, if I didn't take advantage of this opportunity, because I have you as, a college president here on the show. So I'm going to ask you another question that it's been it's burning for me. For colleges and institutes, creating a greener and sustainable future is really critical. What do you think? What insights do you have on this, and where do you think we can go into the future on this?
There's lots of great discussions about that. We expect climate change to be a disruptive force that's not only going to threaten existing jobs, but also create new jobs. And creating that greener, more sustainable future requires not just new training programs that target emerging lines of work, like, for example, maybe environmental auditing or new occupational profiles associated with renewable energy, but it also requires the addition or adaptation to existing training programs and curricula to include such things as new construction or manufacturing standards, new knowledge and skills in areas like automotive technology, if we're talking about converting existing vehicles to new forms. So ecotourism, alternative energy, and so on. It just goes on and on across all sectors. So we expect climate change to be a disruptive force. But once again, colleges have been monitoring the technological advances and policy changes related to climate change, and have been adding program and adapting existing areas to date. And so we need to continue to remain relevant by offering the skills and training and competencies that are not only in need today, but that prepare the labor market for the changes coming down the road, so that employers are equipped, as we've seen the need for in COVID, to adapt and respond and change their business models accordingly.
Thanks. I really appreciate you taking a moment to share that with me. Before we get too far down the path onto our topic on future skills today, Mary, I did have the opportunity to sit down last week with a gentleman by the name of Matthew Hicks. Now, he's a second-year student of an associate's arts degree in psychology at Camosun College. And, you know, maybe if it's okay, let me just play my interview with him, because I would like to share that with the audience. Thanks.
Matt, as a mature student, what was your motivation in returning to college and in your choice of program?
Well, I mean, throughout my 20-year electrical career, I often experienced that I wasn't in the right spot, that I didn't feel right in my profession. Although it's an excellent field and there's a lot of money involved in it, I just always felt that if I'd focused my educational goals more as a teenager and young adult, that I would be somewhere where it felt right. It felt like I was making a difference rather than just making money. Then in 2018, I kind of got a little push. I was inflicted with a workplace injury. And after several years of rehabilitation, doctor's appointments, and specialists, I came to the conclusion that it was time to take a leap and go back to school for a new career. The staff at Camosun have been absolutely amazing and have gone above and beyond whatever support I need.
How do you see yourself responding to this changing environment?
Well, personally, I feel it's critical to never stop learning. I mean, as the labor market and the need for new skills evolves, so too must the people who desire to fill these jobs, including myself. Today's society, there's really no reasonable excuse for giving up on learning or thinking that you can't get back into it. Especially now that the majority of it's taking place online. So personally, my plan is to continue advancing my education and to be open to the new ideas, technologies, and practices as they come up, never to close my mind off and say I know everything, because that's not true. It's ever evolving. And then once I'm able to enter into the workplace and have the foundational skills in place, what my goal is to evolve with the field. And to never remain stagnant, and to always strive to take another course, to learn another lesson, to open my mind to other possibilities and other ideas. And that's my goal, is to evolve with the field in practical means.
Sorry, I muted myself. Mary, I mean, I think that really does set the stage somewhat to the context of the discussion. At the beginning of the show, I did share go to a live poll, and I just wanted to see if I can bring up the poll results here in a second. Let me just see if I can do it. Here we go. And let's see what those poll results were. I see the poll at the was with the skilled landscape shifting across many sectors, what should be the main focus for the future skills? The 62% said all of the above: a stronger connection between industry and post-secondary institutions, a national framework for micro-credentialing, a focus on prior learning assessment, and of course AI mapping pathways for the student. All of the above was the answer. I think, you know, I think you're going to be covering all of those issues with your guests on the show, with your guests now.
Yeah, I just want to say first, with regard to Matt, I'm just beaming with pride on behalf of my colleagues at Camosun. What an excellent ambassador, not just for them and the quality education that they've provided, but as a student in our Canadian college system. So thanks for sharing his interview with our guest today.
It was a lot of fun to do. He was so articulate and so interesting. He has a fascinating background. Mary, I'm turning the show over to you and your guests. It's all yours now.
Okay. First, I want to thank everyone. We tried really hard to have the U.S. presidential inauguration moved so that we would not have these competing priorities. But alas, something about crowds and syndicates and all this stuff, so thank you for choosing us over that event. We're glad you're here. Replay is an agent of convenience, so we can all YouTube it later. Welcome again to Shingai, Stephen, and João. My goodness, what a privilege to facilitate a conversation between these three dynamic and knowledgeable individuals. We got to meet the other day virtually and couldn't stop the conversation. It was so rich and really good. So hopefully we'll get to a lot of that today. Just to give you a few thoughts to frame today's discussion, to ensure a sustainable workforce, contribute to that sustainable economy that we've mentioned, and respond to the continuous evolution of the labor market, which has never stopped, but is moving faster than ever before nationally and globally, we must approach skills development in innovative ways and create equal opportunities for lifelong learning. We also are interested in creating a greener and sustainable future, and it is one of the most pressing issues of our time, and it requires timely and innovative responses to new challenges, especially when you look at that clock, and the difference that last minute makes is incredible, and we're on the cusp. In the past decade, small and medium-sized enterprises, and this is close to my heart as a small business owner for over 25 years, our small and medium-sized enterprises, and I don't want to leave out our large businesses as well, but those in particular have been pivotal, not only to our gross domestic product, but to building the private sector labor force and the creation of new jobs. They have led the way. And so with that as a context, we're going to get into this awesome panel who has incredible knowledge and experience to share and contribute on this topic. It was really hard narrowing it down, but we're going to start with at least 3 questions, and maybe our audience will pose more. All have graciously shared their social media information, so you can follow and connect with them after today's panel. But we're going to start on training and skills development. And I'm going to start with João. How can we better prepare the workforce with the necessary skills to respond to employers' needs, not just of today, but also tomorrow? Oh, I think you're on mute, João. The phrase of 2020/2021. No, sorry, João. We're still not getting you. Shingai, can I kick it over to you? How can we better prepare the workforce with the necessary skills to respond to employers' needs today and tomorrow? And I know you're doing some exciting work on this. Maybe you could share a bit with us.
Sure. So let's start with why we need to make any kind of change, right? So we already have systems in place. We have education systems that are functional. If we're talking about preparing learners for the future, what's changed, what's different? So 2 obvious things come to mind. The first one we are currently still figuring out, which is COVID-19. And then the second one is actually from the 80s. It is the internet, right? And internet-related technologies. So if you look at those 2, I think of them as a camel humps in our lifetime and for our generation. The amount of change that has come as a result of those 2 significant developments in our timeline are such that the future is so different. So if you look at the job market, if you look at the labor market, if you look at the types of problems that we need to solve, including health-related problems such as the pandemic, you spoke about the need for green, all of these different types of challenges that we need to solve as a society, then for that reason, we need to evolve our education systems. And the primary ways that I would do that is twofold. One is we need to start further upstream. So we need to start exposing young people to interdisciplinary approaches to education. So you can study art history if you would like to do that, but you also need to pull in some electives related to technology and the demands of current industry. So that's number one. And then the second thing that I would do is I think we should also make sure that we are linked to industry. So the workplace has evolved tremendously, and I don't know if that's filtering as well as it should. In fact, I'm going to say I do know that it's not filtering as well as it should into our traditional education system. So I'll leave it there for now, and maybe we'll pass it on to my other colleagues on the call.
Thank you, Shingai. You made some really interesting points. So I'm just going to, you talk about what's changing for learners from an employment perspective and ways that we can respond. Stephen, I know that you and your organization do a lot of labor market research, and I'm just wondering from your perspective, what is required to ensure that underrepresented groups with various pathways acquire the skills that will help them succeed in the workforce? What are you seeing? What is the data telling us about those who are underrepresented and what these pathways can do to maybe increase their participation or persistence?
Mary, I think we may have lost Stephen real quickly. So I think it's just right now we're having a conversation just with yourself and Shingai. Denise,
Yes,
are you
absolutely,
there?
I'm there.
Denise, maybe we could bring you back into this conversation as well. I see João is there too, but I'm not sure. Joao's having troubles hearing, so we're going to ask João to leave the room, and hopefully he can hear us, and then maybe he can rejoin again. Denise, if it's all right by you, Mary, do you mind repeating your question, and maybe Denise can sort of pick up on that a little bit?
Oh, for sure, because I know this is something that Denise is very passionate about. It's looking at what's required to ensure that underrepresented groups such as our immigrants and newcomers, Indigenous learners, displaced workers acquire the skills that will help them succeed in the workforce. And I know you know this because you're feet on the ground, you listen and talk to members, and you also are part of a national conversation. What do you say about that?
So what I would say, Mary, is that first of all, we need to take into account where people are at, and then bring them where they want to go. So assess the competencies that they have through, for example, prior learning assessment recognition. This is one example. But then one of the big issues that we have observed is that sometimes people are not engaged into their learning because they are literally barriers to them that could be financial. Sometimes it's cultural. Sometimes it's transportation. Sometimes it's daycare. So what I would say is that it's important that we address those financial barriers. But then we also need to take into account what we call wraparound services, because sometimes people, for reason X or Y, they don't know how to learn, or they need specific support in some fashion or another one, and they need to be accompanied. So that is very, very important. And finally, we need to take into account the cultural aspect, because, you know, we need to ensure that our curriculum, for example, are inclusive of Indigenous culture, inclusive of the culture of the people that live now in Canada that came from abroad, you know, hundreds of years ago, or 10 or 5 years ago. So those aspects, I'll just stop here because I believe that the others are back now. So for me, those aspects are crucial. And I have to say that I'm very proud to say that the college and institute system is right on those aspects.
Thank you, Denise. Stephen, I just want to get you to say yes if you can hear me and you're back, because I'm going to push a question towards you.
Not sure we're getting Stephen either. Sorry.
Okay. No, we see you, but we can't hear you. So
now?
Oh,
No.
there we go. Beautiful. Stay, as they say in Newfoundland, stay where you're at till it comes where you're to. All right. So you deal with data every day. So I'm really curious, from your perspective, how do we ensure, one of the things we struggle with as colleges, although we pride ourselves on being responsive in terms of programmatic changes, and I talked a little bit about that through the questions that Andrew asked, nevertheless, we know we need to move faster, but we rely a lot on data, and most of what we have is lagging. How can we get to some of those in time or leading indicators of what's changing in the labor market, so that we can better respond in time with the labor market as opposed to as a follow-up, so that we're fueling businesses when they need to explore that growth? That's one question. And then my second one is, based on what we're talking about in terms of moving the needle on micro-credentials and seeing more people participate in post-secondary, how will we know from an evidence-based perspective that we're moving the needle on that? Do we need new data sets, or is what we have enough? Two questions.
Well, two very big questions. I mean, I think when I think about the first one, I would say it's not just that our labor market information with respect to the workforce development is lagging. I think it needs a whole rethink. And when I think about Denise's opening remarks, she talked very much about skilled workforce, right? And Mary, you mentioned skills and training, and the student from Mosen talked about the importance of skills. And so I think what we want to really, from our perspective, emphasize is what we've seen in the last few years and going forward is a radical shift of how we think about workforce development from what was primarily based on qualifications, so whether or not you have a degree, to something which is much more complicated, which is skills. And so our entire way of thinking about and collecting data and speaking about jobs is predicated on something which is still important, so qualifications and credentials, but must now be sort of reinforced with skills. And so for us, I think what we really need in this conversation around how we address some of the barriers that Denise mentioned, or in terms of Shingai's issue of pathways of helping an individual get from A to B, we really need to start talking about jobs from that skill lens. So what is it that employers are needing from a skill perspective in order for them to succeed and be productive? And in turn, what do I as an individual sort of need to acquire in terms of skills in order to sort of gain that job? And then I think for the colleges, it's really, they're in that special niche and have been so for a while about bringing those two together. So how can I help individual acquire a skill set in order to help them find employment? And so I think in the face of disruption and all of the changes that we're seeing, we really need to rethink how we discuss workforce development, and how qualifications, as important as they are really kind of a stepping stone in terms of thinking about skills. And so for me, underlying all of these issues is how can we get better labor market information around the skill requirements of jobs? And there are some new innovative tools that are out there, but yeah, it requires a rethink, I think, for all of the partners involved if we're going to be successful.
And are those same tools the ones that will let us know if we've moved the needle, or is there something else we should be adding there?
Yeah, I mean, I think, honestly, yeah, how do we measure the outcomes, I guess, to your second point is, I think in Canada, and having spent a little bit of time outside, I think we need to do a little bit more of a promotion of culture of evaluation in terms of programming, be it skills or qualifications. And I think far too often we've thought about measuring success really kind of in a vacuum, and there isn't that same kind of culture of evaluation of programs and policies that I see elsewhere. And so I think we really need to, when we're developing this whole entirely new infrastructure and ways of thinking about jobs, we need to recognize that it's okay to kind of fail, right? So let's try and test different things and see if it works or doesn't work. And so in that space, I would say Canada's a little bit behind in terms of how we sort of instill a sense of evaluation in how we try and test new programs.
Thanks very much, Stephen. That's awesome. I was hoping we would dig at some of those things. João, are you able? I saw him there. Is he got video and sound at this point? Okay, well, I'll then just open it up between Denise and Shingai and Stephen. We know it's a challenge, and when you think about the difference between looking at qualifications versus skills, that's one of the things we grapple with as colleges. In looking at qualifications, we tend to engage employers by sector and by program area to get an idea of where is the overlap, the intersection of the skills and competencies that are of interest to most employers. And the reason I was trying to direct that to João is because of his work with the European Commission. It's across jurisdictions and employers. But we sort of grapple with the same thing, and we try to pull that intelligence into sort of the best of everything for as many people as possible in our certificates and diplomas and for some degrees. But how, when we're facing these rapid changes to our work environments, where as we've seen in COVID, people are having to upend their business models and totally change everything. We can no longer necessarily take in and respond at a macro level. We've talked about needing to respond at that micro level with skills and competencies. So what new approaches are needed to grow the innovation capacity of small and medium-sized enterprises? And how do we marry that, Stephen, as you said, make that connection between those employed or seeking employment with the opportunities that are constantly evolving and changing? And João, anytime you're back online, feel free to jump in, my friend. Yeah. All right, anybody want to start on that?
Yeah, I can get started. And I think, João, also just check your sound. I think we can see you, but we weren't able to hear you. But I'll kick it off and start with the data. You asked me a question about data, and we do have some other data sources that we can look at beyond what is traditionally available to colleges and universities. For example, in my work at Fireside Analytics, one of the things that I ended up doing was developing online courses together with IBM. And they're all data science and technology related courses on their MOOC platform, cognitiveclass.ai and Coursera. And to date, the number we have is close to 500,000 people have taken those courses. Now, the data that I've been able to get out of this group, 500,000 is a significant number, right? It's more than my friends and family at this point. So these are real people in the world who are actively looking for skills. And when we started this work, I'd say maybe 4 years ago, we couldn't have known that the number would grow to 500,000. So what's driving that? Well, firstly, there is a demand for people all over the world who want to learn data science and technology skills. And if they're coming to a MOOC platform, yes, cost is a barrier. So traditional education systems, colleges, universities, cost is going to be a factor. And MOOC platforms may have a competitive advantage there. But then more than that, I think it's the approaches to education, right? So when private sector creates something like that, so when creators like myself develop something like that, we are not bound by the restrictions of even some of the regulatory restrictions of colleges and universities. So we can try a number of different ways to deliver the educational programming. So if you have short videos, if you have interviews, if you have different types of assignments, you're teaching computer programming, etc., all of those things are done in traditional contexts, but we are able to change how we deliver them. So that's the one sort of example of, if we look at those types of data sets, we have 500,000 people from all over the world who signed up to a MOOC platform to take data science courses. How did that happen? What were they after? Could they not find that in a traditional education system? So that's one. And then something else that we can possibly look at is from a Canadian perspective is, let's look at the immigrants that come to the country, typically from that sort of skills express entry visa sort of perspective. So these are folks who, for the most part, have a master's degree. I'd say 50% of people who come through those programs have a master's degree already. They arrive in Canada and must now find jobs. By looking at the data sets of where those people land, that can give us a really good indication of where the opportunities are. And we can start to analyze, are we using those people in the right skills based on their training, or are they slotting into, the roles that will pay them? Right. I loved what Matthew said about, he felt that he wasn't living up to his full potential, and then chose to go back to school to try and rectify that. So by trying to analyze, that group of people is very unique in the sense that they are skilled, they're smart, they're probably the best and the brightest from wherever they came from. Trying to see where they end up in Canada is a good assessment of where the job market ends up absorbing those people. And then from there, the colleges and universities can start to analyze their own programming to try and see whether they're correctly aligned with industry and with the market.
So if I may, Andrew, I'd like to intervene with one thing.
Absolutely.
So Shingai talked about the fact that how the private sector has been reacting and being quick to respond to the needs. I just want to dispel a myth here and to make sure that people realize that in fact colleges and institutes have adapted very well to ensure that they were able to customize the needs for skills, whether for reskills or upskill, in a variety of ways, you know, from having a program that would be for 1 hour up to a month, or micro credentials, offering courses, you know, at night, during the weekend, even, to ensure that people could still stay at work. And they have been pivoting very, very quickly. We have concrete examples of micro credentials that were developed literally in 5 weeks in order to answer the needs that were related to the pandemic. So that said, people, you know, whenever they want to reskill and upskill, they should literally knock on the door of a college or an institute, because 95% of Canadians live within 50 kilometers of those. And of course now offering a lot of online program also, everything is possible.
Yeah, I was going to pick up on a thread there as well and throw it to our panelists. You know, one of the things that we're grappling with is, Denise said, in a time of rapid change and so much uncertainty, you know, both there's new entrants to the field standing up short duration courses and micro credentials very quickly. And then you also have longstanding institutions doing the same thing. And one of the things we grapple with is, how do we distill that? How do we create common language and understanding around qualifications, whether they be at a macro level, a certificate, diploma, degree, or at a micro credential way? How do we ensure that employers, students, prospective students, working individuals understand the quality, the value, what it means? Because it, you know, I kind of use the you know, analogy of like stop signs and yield signs. They for the most part mean the same thing across the majority of jurisdictions, right? But when we start into unique signage, then when you're new or foreign to a place, it doesn't necessarily make as much sense. Or if everybody did it differently, those things would mean the same. So how important is a qualifications framework, particularly at a national level, maybe even international? And again, if João is able to participate, I know he's got, anyway, experience in this area, but how important is it? And how do we go about that to ensure that, most importantly, individuals and employers know what it means and can rely on it when they're trying to find the most qualified candidate or apply for the right job?
Yeah, if I could maybe quickly look, I think this is a fundamental issue, right, in terms of how we move from, I think, a more credential-based system to a skill-based system, right? So when I was going to university and thinking about a job, and how we collect information is you either have the degree or you don't, right? Okay, then you can maybe look at transcripts and think, okay, is that a good degree, not a bad degree? But it was principally a 1 or a 0. And I think we had a relatively good framework for how we thought about macro credentials. But you're right. I mean, as we move in and have moved in already to the skills space and see this acceleration, we are lost in translation, right? In terms of what employers want, what employers think they need, and how players like the College of Institutes of Canada can be that intermediary between the two. And so there's been a lot of lost in translation. I think, yes, there's already lots of frameworks out there. And for us, I think what's important is to ensure that the different frameworks can speak to another. And I think, you know, Shingai hinted at this a little bit on the individual side, but for us, there's great possibilities in big data on the demand side. So looking at job vacancies and thinking about, how can we articulate skills in a meaningful way from the employer side, so that individuals and institutions can acquire and provide training that sort of meets those needs. And so I think for us, look, my opinion is that there'll be lots of languages out there. We just need to make sure that the right infrastructure is in place so we can provide that translation. So when someone says they need Python, for instance, programming language, it might also just be okay if that person knows another language. And so the skill is more quantitative analysis rather than whether or not I have Python. And so I think you're absolutely right. There's been a lot of translation. I don't think one framework necessarily will do it, but we need to make sure that there's mechanisms in place so that the different ways of speaking about skills can be translated so we are on the right page to help people sort of move up and get good jobs.
I'm going to step in here, Mary, if it's all right by you, because we have a bunch of questions from the audience here, and I'd like to just sort of to ask these around if I can. One of the questions that came in is, are PSE funding systems and business models well suited to upskilling and reskilling, or is this space primarily an opportunity for the private sector? And I think that's a fair question, and I'd like to get your opinion on it, Mary, and what you think. And then, of course, I'm going to, Denise is here too. I'd like to see her on a macro level what she thinks. But Mary, how about we start with you with that question?
Sure, I think it is a great question, and it is going to possibly require some changes in how what the expectations are, how institutions are measured. And I know that's scary for some because we've kind of been measured in one way for a long time. That's in no way meant to give the impression that it's the same across the country. There are different formulas across the country, and so I won't say that it's the same, but I'll just speak from my own perspective. You know, our grant has been based on full-time programming. And so you're absolutely right to the person who posed the question. It is going to require conversations with our ministry. Right now, we're still mostly full-time certificates and diplomas, but we are moving into the micro-credential space. We do have that capacity in some programs like cybersecurity already offered in that format. But as that part of our business grows, yes, we absolutely have to look at our business model, how it's resourced, how it's funded, and that is going to require conversations. And to Stephen's point, how will success be measured? Because in the past, we looked at number of graduates, how many are employed in a field related to their studies, how many are employed in New Brunswick. Well, you know, is that the ultimate measure, or is it post-secondary education? Does that necessarily have to be equivalent to a qualification? And, you know, related field, we know that mobility is on the rise. People are moving between jobs within an employer, between employers, between sectors. So how important is it that they stay in the field related to their studies? Is that sort of mindset or measurement evolving and changing? So it's an absolutely good question. It is going to require evolution, and hopefully we can work collaboratively with our provincial governments, at least here in Canada, to figure that out.
Denise, do you want to add just really quickly, if you could add something to that?
Absolutely. What I would say is that the continuing education arm of the colleges and institutes is already well equipped to answer to those needs and to do the upskilling and reskilling quickly, whether at the individual level or at the corporate level for a given company. They can customize a program, and very, very quickly. It doesn't take a lot of time. And what I would say also is that I think what is important, and I will make a link with what we were discussing earlier, is to begin to measure things, not so much from a paper point of view or the credential per se, but from a competency base. Because, and I believe firmly that eportfolio are the future, where in fact individuals are able to showcase what they are able to do, and then the employer, the potential employer, can see them in practice, and distance has no importance when we do that. And I believe that that's where colleges and institutes need to move.
Stephen, I want to direct the next question towards you, if I may. How can we enable new and innovative approaches to skill development and validation? You know, you were referencing the fact that, you know, earlier on, we were using sort of, you know, graduate university graduation as a baseline, and then, you know, but what other innovative approaches, as opposed to looking at specific skills, but maybe broader skill sets and ways to do this? So, what are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I mean, I think it touches a little bit upon Denise's sort of notion around, yeah, this sort of e-portfolio, right? So it becomes trickier in terms of how we measure skills at the individual level and what the role and responsibilities are of post-secondary institutions, right? And so at least, yeah, traditionally we thought that, yeah, you would have the credential or not, and then you would enter the labor market, and away you sort of went. But yeah, now in thinking about the challenges where we find ourselves is in a position that we have lots of people with post-secondary education in Canada, but employers saying we're missing skills, and we don't know which skills sometimes. Or to Denise's point, what proficiency of skills? So is there a skill shortage or not? And I think, yeah, the e-portfolio notion is, I think, a grand and innovative idea around how we can sort of measure skills at the individual level. But yeah, I think then it will be still down to the employer, nevertheless, to better still articulate and assess the individual skills. But again, with that framework of mind that we're thinking about skills, not just whether or not they have a macro or micro credential. There are maybe ways you can think, to Shingai's point around big data on the individual side, but of course, yeah, this comes with, I think, some obviously privacy challenges around, you know, there's been some organizations sort of scraping CVs that are available, but how could we really do that sort of on a bigger scale? I think there's some big questions around how we might sort of think carefully about that. Really quickly, Shingai, something you can add to?
Yes. Firstly, I'd just like to, Denise, I think I struck a nerve there when I spoke about the speed and agility of traditional education systems. And for the record, I'm a fan, right? So I support traditional education systems. I myself am looking at a PhD in the top business schools in Canada. So there is a role for both, for the informal sector in education and for the formal sector in education. I think what Stephen just mentioned is spot on, is if we're looking at skills, then we have to look at where people are like water. They will go to where the skills are because they're looking for jobs, right? So if we can start to follow that and see what are people asking for. And I'll give the example of the data science industry. To date, to my knowledge, we still don't have an undergraduate in data science in Canada. So we know that data-related jobs are very much in demand currently and will be more so in the future, given the technologies that we're all using. But we still haven't come up with that formal pathway from high school, elementary school, high school, all the way to university, to a master's degree, to get into that field. Right. If the other hat I wear is at the Vector Institute, I lead professional development there, and my job is to disseminate artificial intelligence research into educational programming. How do we manufacture an AI researcher? You know, and if you look at all those backgrounds, those people are coming from engineering, master's degrees. They're typically coming from computer science. We are not getting that broad breadth of participation from a number of different roles. So the work to be done is significant, and I'm acknowledging we've all done a good job, formal and informal. But I think the work still to be done is great, and we can see that in this one example of a sector like data science, which is growing.
Well, we're running out of time here. Thank you, Shingai, and I appreciate your answer. But we're running out of time here. João, one more time, can you hear us at all? Or, I'd really hate to leave this conversation. I think you're frozen on me. You can hear us, but you can't. But we can't hear you. We still can't hear you. João, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. You know what we're going to do? We're going to find a way to get some of your responses to some of these questions and incorporate them for everybody else, because we do want to get them. I apologize for the technical problems, ladies and gentlemen, that we've had. We have 30 seconds left, so I'm going to go around the table. I want everybody's response to this last question. And this is okay that we're excluding the European Commission on what federal and provincial governments what can federal and provincial governments do to ensure equality of opportunity for lifelong learning and removing systemic barriers to participation? Shingai, I'm starting with you. You have 10 seconds or 15 seconds to answer that question.
Well, the first thing is let's make scholarships available for the types of industries that we want all kinds of different folks to participate in. And let's also target those scholarships to previously disadvantaged and excluded groups. And let's also focus on entrepreneurship in any of our educational programming, because with these new environments we have to create, we can't just fall back on the existing jobs and roles and titles.
Perfect. Stephen, how about yourself?
I would start by saying, recognize it's not just the role and responsibility of the governments. And I think for me, it's a primary role of government in this space is to make sure they're acting as the convener, right? So are they bringing together the needs of individuals, employers, and the training institutions, and making sure that from LMIC's perspective, that the right data infrastructure is there to facilitate that conversation.
Fair enough. Denise, what do you think?
I would say, and I mentioned it already, financial support, but for two categories. First, the learners, because I think it's very, very important. It could be also incentive for employers where, for example, their funding is matched. And I would say also funding to pilot initiatives. Because I think it's important to ensure that we develop proof of concept, if you want, that could be scaled up after. So for me, that would be critical.
Mary, I'm going to leave the last word to this to you, because you still have the Denise is speaking on a national perspective largely, but you work very closely with your provincial government, and I'm sure many colleges have to work very closely with their provincial government. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think to Stephen's point, it's a collaborative effort. The changes that are required are widespread. I think it's about meeting learners where they are. In today's environment, which isn't going to change anytime soon, people are required to access most of their services virtually when it comes to education, when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to registering their car, all that sort of stuff. Transportation is becoming limited with, it's not even available in most rural areas. It's limited at best right now with COVID type restrictions in urban areas. So I think it's about creating access and not requiring people to go to physical spaces. That alone will reduce a lot of the barriers that people face. And we also have to have some policy changes where we encourage people to go to school. I know of cases where we've said, well, there's a minimum wage job, even though I just got displaced from one, there's a minimum wage job. So unless you take that, we're going to cut off your assistance. And so that opportunity for reskilling is then lost. And so we need to look holistically at what is going to move our society forward. And we certainly cannot hope for recovery, much less become globally competitive and increase our market share as a country if we're going to leave almost half of our population behind.
Mary, I think you'll agree with me. This has been one heck of a discussion, and I know we're just scratching the surface of it. And I'm really happy to have participated. I want to thank Shingai and Stephen and João. We'll get your opinions into this show, because we want you to contribute to this, and Denise as well, for everything. But everybody, this has been a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much for everybody's time today. And I just want to take a moment, if I may, because I didn't get a chance from the onset to thank everybody, to thank our sponsors for enabling this show. Of course, Colleges and Institutes Canada would like to thank TD, Field Effect, Avis Budget, and BGIS, because without whose support we would not be able to bring you these informative programs. I'm going to encourage everybody to also carry on the conversation and continue to look for more information from CICAN in your inboxes, and make sure you're registered and to the Perspectives newsletter that has multiple perspectives on various issues that we're covering. And then finally, of course, I want to make mention of two other things. First of all, in 2 weeks' time, my counterpart, Norman Latour, will bring you a whole bunch of different perspectives as we talk about the same issue from a French perspective with a series of new guests. So please tune in for that. And then on February 10th, in honor, I guess, in honor of Black History Month, of course, we have our show is called Capturing Black Excellence, which is going to be really interesting as well. So I hope everybody enjoyed today's show. João, I apologize once again, but we'll get your opinions on. Thank you, everybody, for participating, and I hope everybody has a wonderful day. Take care now.
Andrew.
Thank you.